I'm going to press record. All right, our final team today is the Lead Coders. Take it away.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Michael Barron, and our project is about asset-focused security and risk management. Asset-focused security is the act of investigating assets to find vulnerabilities to mitigate threats. This is a proactive model for security rather than a reactive model, because we want to focus on preventing compromises in case they do happen, having to detect and respond to compromise as well.
My name is Trisha Kamaya, and so we have established 3 types of threat, and it is disclosure, integrity, and denial of service. Motivations are secrets, degradation, and disruption. The attributes are financial information, remote operational control change, and mobilized botnets. Studying assets and infrastructure is important in identifying vulnerabilities that potential actors can use to create significant damages. Security professionals can establish potential security plans to mitigate cybersecurity attacks or minimize the impact to our nation's security.
So in terms of asset-focused security and critical infrastructure, we really believe that this is such a great methodology to apply here due to critical infrastructure's vast domain breadth. So for example, as we all know, critical infrastructure is everything from the maritime transportation system to oil and gas pipelines to airways and so on, even critical manufacturing. So it really is such a broad depth we have to deal with. And therefore, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. So as we see here in this asset threat matrix, what this basically is you could pick and choose which assets apply to you, and of those assets, which ones are the most important. And then really have an itemized threat assessment for that asset. As we all know, CIA Triad, different assets face different types of threats and attacks against them. So you're really not going to focus on everything, just the ones that harm you the most and has the most potential to impact your operations. So from here, we see the previous matrix we used. We were able to easily tell the total risk calculations from each of these. And from here, this should help guide critical resource allocation.
So as a team, we're looking to give entities who maintain critical infrastructure a better understanding of their various assets and how they can pinpoint the assets most vulnerable to their systems. Our web application allows for users to input information about their critical infrastructure systems, and it returns them with effective diagnostics and their assets' current security risks and the threats posed if those assets were to be compromised. Our application uses a weight tool, which calculates the overall risk a particular asset may be subject to, as well as graphical display of different vital dependencies that these assets hold. This setup is lightweight and extremely easy to use, as you'll now see.
Okay. So welcome to our risk assessment recommender. Okay, now we're trying to understand 2 main things with these 2 graphics that you're seeing before you. And that's really the essential assets for any critical infrastructure. And these things are defined with high risk. And that's what we're trying to narrow down. But before we go on, let's clarify what these specific nodes are here in this graph. Now, each of these nodes, whether it be load and unload in, warehouses, or anything, are really specific assets in the maritime transportation system, which we included as our domain. Now, to understand which nodes are the most essential, we have to look at both risk and edges for each node. These nodes will be more essential with more connections between assets. You can see cargo shipments has 4, which is more significant than server with only 1 if the risk were the same. Now, whenever we add node to the graph, which you can see through here, let's add a random node or a random asset, which potato, because it has no significant value. We can add arbitrary numbers in here for the time being. And then scrolling down, we'll see that potato was added. Now this added node or asset can be linked up with other assets. That shows the significance in this matrix. One can even edit the node to see more information going into it and seeing the different tags. Now, going into this, each of these nodes contain different CIA values, which are then used with protection values to calculate risk. And these will help determine what type of threat may come up with any given asset, and they'll help with that risk score. Now, with this whole thing, we only had 2 days to develop this, and there's a lot of future improvements we can make with our
Kim, I'm sorry, I have to cut off your video. We have a hard 5-minute stop for our presentation.
presentation, and that will help when creating
Great.
much.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to the Q&A portion. Judges, go ahead.
So I'll ask the question on the CIA. How are you determining the CIA, and does that mean the higher the CIA, the higher the risk?
I could take this question. So what we use for CIA is like the 3 like basic cornerstones, like confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we've pretty much figured that each cyber attack possible fits into at least one of those 3 categories. So let's say something like a DOS would obviously target availability, and like a database breach would be confidentiality. Depending on what the breach does, could also be integrity and so on as well. So the reason why we split it into those 3 is like for each vulnerability and each like weight we assign that vulnerability, the corresponding CI or A value would increase. So we wanted to do that in such a way so we could help draw attention to specific aspects of systems that may be lacking. For example, if you saw during on like our example section for the first page for a SCADA system, we're not really worried if the confidentiality of something like a automatic fire suppressor system in a warehouse was leaked, because like what is there that's confidential about it. However, if the availability was impacted and that system was taken offline, then that's a big problem. So we wanted to give like the individual people who use this the opportunity to like select which weights for which of the 3 CIA aspects they value more, because supply chains and critical infrastructure are so vast, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution.
Thank you.
So I had a quick question. First of all, your risk is usually threat, vulnerability, consequence, or some combination of those. So I think what you've done is you've taken elements of risk, but I don't know if you've completed the included sort of an overall risk. So you might want to just sort of relabel that, I don't know, some kind of vulnerability criterion or something along those lines. But besides that, which is just semantics, I'm also interested in sort of what is your graph going to tell me? I mean, it would be great if your graph could actually, create a heat map or whatever of areas of your network that have greater or lesser. And I also wasn't clear exactly how you combined sort of the nodal position, like the centrality of the nodes, et cetera, in the network, with the features of the node itself. So kind of the links, the number of links, how did that relate to the actual characteristics of the nodes or properties of the nodes? And what would this all come out to? I mean, like, how would it help me understand my...
So in regards to the first part with the heat map, what we like our grand scheme for this eventual vision of this rendition would be the heat or like the impact or vulnerability risk, whatever you want to call it, of each node. That would be based on factors that you as the end user could tailor. So one such factor would be like the raw like risk value for like C risk, I risk, A risk, so on. But also we have the option to, in addition to that risk value, take into consideration the amount of other subsystems, the amount of other assets that such a node would interface with. So let's say a node has a moderate risk value, but it also interfaces with a higher than average number of other systems. So we could potentially flag that as critical just because so many other systems rely on it. It's a bottleneck of sorts. I hope that like answers your question. We want this to be like as general purpose as possible to different like a broad spectrum of users, while at the same time maintaining like the basic systemization process of how a risk is calculated to maintain that as the same.
All right, that takes us to our time for the Q&A portion.